All right, vintage listeners, a little bit of camouflage there. I've been a little bit fat-fingered tonight, cutting off songs just a little bit before. Right before that, we had Dangerous from 1991, Doobie Brothers. That's what I was trying to do when I kind of cut it off and fumbled through it. You're listening to the Uncle Tim Show on Vintage Radio 105.5, brought to you by Ben's Bicycles at 2458 Comanche Avenue in Clinton, or Comanche Avenue. There's a big controversy on that. I believe it is Comanche Avenue. I'm riding a bike from Ben's. I think you should be too. Check him out. Check him out online or on his Facebook page. All right, my brother is in the studio. Maurice Possley in here from Laguna Beach, California. He is helping with some of the duties around the old homestead here in town. He was here a couple of months ago. We had quite a interview on a lot of the projects that he has worked on, including we even went back as far as the bank robbery in Erie way back in the day. I'll tell you what, for those of you that weren't tuned into that, my brother Maurice is an award-winning journalist, not an award-winning DJ like yours truly, but my brother is an award-winning journalist. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 2008 for investigative reporting at the Chicago Tribune, where he was a criminal justice reporter for 25 years, four-time Pulitzer finalist for his reporting. My brother worked as a research fellow at Santa Clara University Law School's Northern California Innocence Project. He's now a senior researcher for the National Registry of Exonerations, a national online database of more than 1,520 wrongful convictions in the United States since 1989. Maurice, my brother, is also the author of 3 nonfiction books, Everybody Pays, 2 Men, 1 Murder, and the Price of Truth, The Browns Chicken Massacre, and Hitler in the Crosshairs, a GI's story of courage and faith. So here's where we are. Back in 2006, the Chicago Tribune published a series of articles about the execution of a man named Carlos de Luna, was executed down in Texas. And my brother Maurice is going to talk about how he came to reinvestigate this case and where we are 12 years later. So turn on your mic there, Mo. Are you there?
I'm here.
Well,
I'm in the house. I'm in the studio.
Seems like you were just here a couple of weeks ago, but a couple of months. That's how time flies.
In January it was.
Carlos de Luna, what a case.
What a case is right. And I thought that what I would do is to start by actually reading from the beginning of the very first article that we wrote about the case, because it kind of will introduce people the way we did to readers of the Tribune back in 2006.
Lay it on us.
For many years, few questioned whether Carlos de Luna deserved to die. His execution closed the book on the fatal stabbing of Wanda Lopez, a single mother and gas station clerk whose final desperate screams were captured on a 911 tape. Arrested just blocks from the bloody crime scene, de Luna was swiftly convicted and sentenced to death, even though he proclaimed his innocence and identified another man as the killer. But 16 years after de Luna died by lethal injection, the Tribune has uncovered evidence strongly suggesting that the acquaintance he named, Carlos Hernandez, was the one who killed Lopez in 1983. Ending years of silence, Hernandez's relatives and friends recounted how the violent felon repeatedly bragged that de Luna went to death row for a murder he had committed. The newspaper investigation involved interviews with dozens of people, a review of thousands of pages of court records, and it shows the case was compromised by shaky eyewitness identification, sloppy police work, and a failure to thoroughly pursue Hernandez as a possible suspect. So that was sort of the beginning of what we started to do there, was tell the story of the wrongful execution of Carlos de Luna for a murder committed by Carlos Hernandez. We got into the case because myself and Steve Mills, my fellow reporter, had published a series of articles in 2004 about another execution in Texas, Cameron Todd Willingham, who was executed for setting a fire that killed his 3 kids. And we had conclusively shown through experts that, in fact, that fire was an accident, and he was executed anyway. So there was a law professor at Columbia Law School in New York who saw that we were writing about cases in Texas and reached out, and he had gotten a grant to sort of preliminarily look for cases in Texas where someone had been executed where there were strong claims of innocence, and said, would you like to take a crack at the Carlos de Luna case? And so we said yes. And we went down there a number of times. And one of the remarkable things about this, so I investigated wrongful convictions for a number of years at the Tribune, and so people ask me, how do you decide what cases to look at? And part of it is you start to look at the evidence and see if, in fact, anything jumps out at you. And in this case, what jumped out was Carlos de Luna was arrested 45 minutes after the crime, hiding under a pickup truck within a few blocks of the crime scene. He didn't have a shirt on. They found his shirt not long after. It was a white shirt, and he had not a drop of blood on his body or on his clothes. And when I saw the crime scene photos, there was blood everywhere. And so one of the remarkable things about this case was the crime occurred while she was on the phone to the police department. And so I want to go back to the narrative.
She's working in
It was a Valero gas station.
And run.
It would be like if you would imagine Casey's.
Okay.
And at that point in time, it was 1983, when you pulled up, you could self-pump. They didn't have pay at the pump, but you had to signal the person inside, and they would turn the pump on for you. Okay, and they could decide whether or not to turn the pump on for you. And so there was a guy, and I'll talk about him in a minute, and that's for the reason partly why I'm here. So she's working in this gas station, and let me just read a little bit. So it was a cool Friday night in February 1983, just a little after 8 o'clock, and a guy named George Aguirre pulls in to pump gas, and he saw a man standing outside the station with a beer in his hand and a knife, a pocket knife, a big pocket knife with the blade exposed. And the guy walked up to him and asked for money, asked for a ride to a nightclub. And this guy said no, and he walked back to the outside of the station, and he went inside to pay for his gas, and there he told Wanda Lopez, there's a guy outside with a knife. So she called police, and when she did, the dispatcher said they couldn't do anything unless he came in to the station. Whether that's right or wrong, that's conjecture. Minutes later, he did come into the station, and this is what we wrote. Lopez redialed police, and dispatcher Jesse Escachilla took the call. Can you have an officer come to 2602 South Padre Island Drive? She asked. Has he threatened, saying that there was a suspect with a knife who walked into the store? Has he threatened you in any way? Not yet. And then, apparently speaking to the man on the counter, she said, can you give me just a minute? What does he look like? Escachilla, the 911 guy, says. He's a Mexican, she said, dropping her voice, standing right here at the counter. Huh? Can't talk, she said. To the man, she said, thank you. Don't hang up, okay? The 911 guy says. Okay, she said. Then to the man, 85 cents.
This guy with the knife, he's right at the counter. She's waiting on him right now.
85 cents, she says. Where is he now? The 911 guy says. Right here, she said, whispering. She's got the phone. This isn't a headset. She's got the phone to her ear. Is he a white male? No. Black? No. Hispanic? Yes. Tall? Short? Uh-huh. Tall? Tall. Thank you, she said to the man at the counter. Does he have the knife pulled out? The 911 guy says. Not yet. Is it in his pocket? Uh-huh. All right. We'll get someone over there. Suddenly, Lopez shouted in a panic, you want it? I'll give it. I'll give it to you. I'm not going to do nothing to you. Please. And the telephone bangs to the floor, and you hear the dun, dun, the receiver hit the floor. And you hear the 911 guy say, got an armed robbery in progress going down right now. And in the background, you could hear her screaming. So that was captured live on that phone call. At that moment, a guy named Kevin Baker, who lived in Corpus Christi, had pulled into the station, and he was going to pump gas, but the pump wasn't turned on. And so he looked over to try to signal, say, hey, turn on the pump, and he saw Wanda in a struggle with someone, and a thump, and started to walk to the door. And as he did so, he came face to face with a guy who comes out and says, I've got a gun. And so he did what most people would do. You back off.
Yeah.
And the guy takes off. And literally on the guy's heels comes Wanda Lopez, staggering out, collapses, and dies right in front of him. The thing that was amazing to me when I started looking at the crime scene photos, well, among other things, is you see one of the detectives standing in the blood in the gas station. I mean, no one. It's like one of the worst violations of protocol to be just standing in the blood. There was blood everywhere. There was blood on the cash register. There was blood on the counter. You could see there were two trails of blood where she was wearing flip-flops, and they had both come off where the guy tried to drag her into a storage room in the back.
Stabbed multiple times.
Oh, yeah. And here is Carlos de Luna. So because the 911 police had been notified before she even got stabbed, because the guy says, we've got an armed robbery in progress. And so they're there almost immediately. And they canvass the area. They just blanket the area. And they find this guy named Carlos de Luna hiding under a truck with no shirt on. They put him in a squad car. They bring him back, bring him to the station. And the guy, Kevin Baker, who had come face to face out the doorway, shined a light through the glass in the back window of the squad car and said, is that the guy? And he says, yeah, that's the guy. So Carlos gets prosecuted, and on the way to one of the things we report is that on the way to the station, from there, he says, if you'll help me, I can help you. I know who did it. And they blew him off. So when we reinvestigated this case, we found out that, in fact, what the truth of the matter was is that Carlos de Luna was out on parole. He was he was a burglar and a thief. He was a huffer, a paint huffer. And he was in a bar across the street from the gas station. And when all the sirens of all the approaching police, he heard that, he bolted because he was on parole and he was not supposed to be in a bar. And the fact that there was so much blood at the scene and there was no blood on him convinced me that that this was a likely case of innocence and we had to reinvestigate it. So we published our series of articles where we got people to talk about how Carlos Hernandez bragged about how his stupid Tocayo, which is Hispanic for namesake, the other Carlos, had gone to death row for his crime.
I looked at these two guys side by side. Pretty incredible.
And they're pretty.
They look like each other.
They really do. And so, one of the things that we did when we reinvestigated the case was to track down all the people who testified at his trial. And one was, of course, Kevin Baker, who was the guy that came face to face with the guy who said, I have a gun. And Kevin lives in southwest Michigan. So we went over there and we talked to him and said, and it was remarkable at the time because he had saved every newspaper clipping, even not just of the trial and of the charges, but of the execution, which meant he was following it afterward. And when we asked him, so when we do these things, we show up at people's doors unannounced because it's too easy to say no to someone and hang up the phone. So you go to their house, say, Kevin, we're here from Chicago and we're going to ask you a few questions. We're looking at this case. How did you come to identify Carlos de Luna? And he said, well, they told me that they found him hiding under a truck, and him being Hispanic and all, I just figured it was him. Did you know for sure? No, I did not. I just figured they had the guy. So I said yes. So, I mean, this is a guy that's been living with, I think, some residual doubt all these years that he helped send a guy to the gurney on the basis of, the cops told me they had the guy and it was close by. And so then when you sit there and you say, but he never had any blood on him, and you tell them all the stuff that witnesses don't get to know when they testify at the trial. They just have their little narrow part of the trial. And he was kind of blown away by it. So we published our article. There's one thing I'll tell you in a minute.
Remind me, how old was de Luna?
He was in his early 20s, so, he was a young guy.
Yeah.
He was a kid.
Yeah.
But he was a kid. So one of the things that we did when we reinvestigated the case was, so you start off by saying when you're going to reinvestigate a case to see if someone potentially was innocent, what you're doing is you're looking for evidence of guilt. Because once you go through everything and you can't find that, that means you got a strong likelihood of someone being innocent.
Yeah, if you find one thing that makes you think, then
right.
You just blow it off and go to the next one.
So
you move on to the next case.
Exactly. So one of the first things we did was we figured out who the death house chaplain was when he got executed.
Right.
Ask if he confessed. And we went to see him, and he said no, he didn't confess. And not only that, he had a tape recording of after every execution.
Right. This is what we kind of went over.
We
a couple
kind of
of
went
months
over,
ago.
but
Yeah.
after every execution, he would dictate the 12 hours that he spent with the accused, the condemned, before he was executed.
Right.
And so one of the things that was certainly remarkable about that was that the death house pastor said that when Carlos, in his final moments, wanted reassurance that, of course, he didn't confess. In fact, he said, look, I never had a daddy, will you be my daddy, kind of thing. And it was remarkable for that. And then he said, can you tell me it's not going to hurt or it's not going to be, and
Yeah, what are you going to say?
well, they used the Texas mix, is what it was called, the 3-drug mix. And in fact, and it's supposed to be fast and quick, and it wasn't. And in fact, he was trying to raise his head. It took like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. And so this is one that the pastor really remembered. So we published that series of articles, and there was a documentary made about the death house pastor.
Right. We put that link up on the website.
So then this past October, I get a call from a guy from Oxford Films, a documentary filmmaker in England. And he says, we're going to be making a documentary specifically about the Carlos de Luna case. Not the death house pastor, but just the
Right.
case. Would you help us on that?
How'd they get a hold of that? They just look for...
Well, Europeans in general consider Americans pretty barbarous because we have the death penalty and they haven't had it for centuries and centuries. And so there's been a lot of great filmmaking done by Europeans, French and British particularly, on the death penalty in the United States. And they look around for cases.
I looked at the list of people that are going to be making this film. Pretty impressive.
They're not shabby.
Yeah,
they've been around the track. They've won a lot of awards. They've done some great stuff. And so I said, sure, I'll help you in any way that you can. So 6 weeks ago, they said, listen, Kevin Baker, and this is the man who came face to face and who said, I'm not really sure if that really was the guy after all. We want him to go on camera, but we can't find him. We don't know where he is. We can't get a hold of him. Can you do that? So I did. I was already coming here, and I figured out that he was still in the same place in Southwest Michigan where he was in 2006.
You just talked to him like 2 days ago.
And Tuesday,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I flew to Detroit, changed my flight, flew to Detroit, got in a car, and headed out and sat on his house until he came home. I got there in the morning, and his truck, there was no truck there. No one answered the door. And then eventually, he showed up. I said, you remember me? He says, you look really familiar. And I said, if I said Carlos DeLuna, Chicago Tribune, he said.
Yeah, he knew you.
Yeah.
How long were you prepared to stake out looking for this guy? I mean, he could have been on vacation for 2 weeks.
That's true. I was going to wait and possibly, so I was there on Tuesday. I was going to wait until Thursday. And I had told the documentary guys, I said, listen, could be a whole crapshoot. I'm pretty sure he lives there. He doesn't have a published phone. Turns out he doesn't have a cell phone. He has and when I asked him what his landline was, he had to go look at it. This is a guy that doesn't use
he is off
a lot
the grid.
of communication, but he uses Facebook. He has a son who's in the military and who's quite accomplished, and he said, I check Facebook every day. So we friended each other on Facebook right there on his computer, and he said, I'll do it. I'll go to Corpus Christi, and I'll go on camera. And so who knows when the film will come out, but when it does, I guarantee you I will come on this radio station and tell you when and how people can see it. Because I've worked on 2 cases, both in Texas, where I'm convinced that they executed innocent people.
So have they asked you to be in this film?
I think they will at some point. But even if they don't, as long as they get the right people who are involved in the case, it sort of depends on whether they get people who are involved in the case to talk, or whether they need some sort of omniscient narrator to sort of do what I just did, which is to sort of tell part of the story. But if you hear that, and people can go online, if you can find, I'm pretty sure to this day, that 911 call, and it's chilling, because you're hearing someone being murdered right there. And I'm not recommending that people do that, but it is a fact. And the family of Wanda Lopez ultimately sued and collected some money over the failure of the police department to respond when she first called and they said, we can't do anything unless he comes inside.
Right.
Which is just like, what are you thinking about?
Yeah.
That would be an appropriate response when you say, there's a guy who's drinking and he's got an open knife in his hand. He's outside the gas station asking people for money. Well, I'm sorry.
So did they contact your partner Steve at all, or just got a hold of you?
They actually came to me first, and they were going to go to Steve if they couldn't find me. And actually, I then called Steve and said, "Guess who I'm going to see here, or I'm going to go find." Kevin Baker, and he said, I still remember what that guy's house looked like. I mean, there are certain things that you do.
Right.
And I remembered exactly how to get there once I got to the town, and I sort of reoriented myself. I knew exactly how to get to the guy's house. And we had a really hard time finding it because it was one of these things where it was on a country blacktop, and the address was one address, but you had to, when you turned off there were like 6 houses up a lane. And they all sort of had the same basic address because they all had one big mailbox out there. So they all had sort of the same address. And I remember we didn't know which house to sit on. We were knocking on people's doors. People were getting pissed off. Dogs are barking, you know.
So Steve was pretty kind of surprised that, you're back on the case.
Yeah.
And here's a good question for you. Who's left in Carlos's family?
Well, he had a sister who, their mother died in the middle of the trial, if you can believe that. But he had one sister who was older, and she was...
That's it? That's who's left?
Yeah. And when we found her, and she had convinced herself... That was a hard interview because we came to her house. She lived in Houston, and she was a very successful... She ran marathons, and she was a successful... She worked for an insurance claims business, and did computer stuff. And we told her all the things that we had found that showed that it was Carlos Hernandez that killed Wanda, not her brother. And she just broke down and sobbed because she had to reconcile, to deal with it, she had convinced herself that her brother did it. And now, after all these years, to be told that, in fact, she felt she had betrayed her brother by coming to believe that he did it.
Will she be in this film, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, they've talked to me about whether or not they can find her. I said, well, if you need to find her, I'm sure I can find her. I'm good at finding people. But
we're a little bit too late for Carlos, and there's probably no compensation.
Can't put the paddles. I can't put the paddles. When she said, "What good does this do me now?" And I said, "Well, I believe that truth is important to know, and for us, the importance is documenting this mistake, this terrible error, in the hopes that people will institute change." To prevent it from happening in the future.
Pretty fascinating. Sounds like these guys, the Brits, are going to get to the bottom of it and make this film, and it'll be a documentary.
Right. Yeah. And I think they're good. I've looked at some of the documentaries that they've made. They're very good.
Yeah, I looked at some of the their past work,
Yeah.
and so instead of being more about the pastor, this is going to be it's all Carlos. What happened?
Right.
Why did he have to die?
And how did they not get the right guy?
Right.
And of course, people can find the articles online just by Googling Carlos de Luna and my name or the Chicago Tribune. But what we learned was that Carlos Hernandez had actually wound up in prison himself for stabbing another woman and died there.
He died in prison.
And we went and talked to his mother, who refused to believe that he could have done anything. He had actually been charged with another murder, and then they dropped the charges, where the woman had been stabbed to death and an X carved in her back. I always believed that he was an informant of some sort for the police department in Corpus Christi, and they were protecting him.
Yeah.
I always did. When we went to talk to his mother and about this, and she said that when Carlos died, and they called her from Huntsville to tell her that he had died, and what should they do with the body? She said, bury him up there. I don't want to pay to have him brought down here.
Wow.
So there's some real,
Yeah.
compassion there. Just bury him up there. And so that's where, if you want to find Carlos, Hernandez grave. And so Carlos de Luna is buried in Corpus Christi.
Wow. Well, keep us posted on that.
I shall.
You'll be rolling into town here from time to time to help out on the home front. And
That's right.
yeah, I'm depending on you to get me off the hook when I'm finally arrested for impersonating a DJ. Don't forget about that.
I'm always here, I got a whole wallet full of get-out-of-jail-free cards that I'm reluctant to, you got to be deserving to get those. But
So, well, anyway, anything else before we cut back to the show?
It's always nice to be back here in Erie. I enjoy it. We had a tree cut down in the neighbor's front yard today. So
I saw that.
That was the excitement of the day.
That could be. I forgot to mention that in my opening comments.
A lot of chainsaw action. And
lots of chainsaw
I
action.
actually posted on my Facebook page a video of the big final trunk falling to the ground.
Wow, that's why I guess that's why I got to be on Facebook. I'm too far off the grid, but
it's really an old fogies now. My son Vashko says, nobody my age, he's a senior in high school, nobody uses that anymore.
Well, anyway, after I get done here tonight where I'm going to be. You're gonna have one iced down for me, and we'll hash it out.
That's right.
Well,
I made some fabulous beef stew.
All right, beef stew from my brother. Anyway, folks, Maurice Possley keeping us informed on the Carlos de Luna case, and quite the case at that. He's going to keep us updated on this film and where it goes, so stay tuned. Right now, let's see, I got to get this show back together. What am I going to do? I'm going to play a song, probably get some birthdays in here. We're going to wing it the rest of the night. Hope everybody's enjoying their Thursday night, and hey, it's almost Friday. We got to be in a good mood, right? That's right, be in a good mood. Don't make me come out there. All right, here's a little Phil Collins and Philip Bailey.